welcome back, Tony. It's been wonderful to have you to help celebrate ARI at 20.
Well, I mean, the thing that made it attractive, of course, the fundamental thing is being right here in the middle of Southeast Asia.
Right.
No doubt about that. As it was put to me initially, and as it had been talked about in Singapore, it was going to be an Institute of Asian Studies. It was clearly going to be the Vice-Chancellor's attempt, or the President's attempt, to boost the social sciences, which he saw as being, I mean, he knew something about Ivy League universities and what they should be like. He didn't know much about Singapore and why it had the peculiar sort of history that it had. So he thought, well, why don't we do more on the social sciences? Why is it so relatively weak? So there was that, and then there was the faculty, which was trying to do something, and he wanted it to do more. He wanted to be more ambitious. And I think he asked people in the faculty, well, what are you good at? Let's have an institute on that. And they said Asian Studies. But I remember somebody, and I think it was Lily Kong, saying to me when I was on one of my first visits, you know, some of us thought it was a bit of a step backwards to go from advanced studies. They had a kind of Institute of Advanced Studies in mind, to go to Asian Studies. I mean, that's pulling in your horns a bit. You're not claiming to take on the world anymore. And I tended to agree with that. And that's why I pushed this idea of changing the name to ARI, Asia Research Institute, because it doesn't say that it has to be Asian Studies. It's saying it is an institute in Asia and of Asia, but not necessarily about Asia. I mean, certainly not exclusively. And I do think that's important, that in the process of trying to decenter the world of the social sciences and humanities, it's important for us not to yield that ground. I mean, not to be compartmentalized as, you know, you guys are only interested in Asia and that's different. And somehow the normative thing is this European exception, which in fact Europe is quite exceptional to most of the world. I mean, this debate was interesting, but I ended up on that side of it, of wanting to say, we want to build an exciting place for everybody to come, where you can see whether your theories make sense from an Asian perspective, but not ruling somebody out because they don't know enough about Asia. So, I mean, when we hired Brian Turner was the most explicit and somewhat controversial case of that he wasn't an Asianist by any definition. He'd written a couple of books. He'd written so many books, he's bound to have written out one or two on Asia, but he wasn't an Asianist. But he seemed willing to learn about Asia and to be a global kind of social theorist in the Asian perspective. And I think Gavin Jones was a little similar. I mean, the demographers are different, but because there are not that many of them. But at the time we appointed him, he was chair of the International Association of Demographers, or whatever it was called. And you know, clearly he had stature among the world's demographers, partly because what's happening in Asia is actually the story. I mean, that's what's so fascinating. It sort of happened already in Europe, but now it's happening just in the most spectacular way. So the exciting work is here. So I guess those were the kinds of thoughts that I had in my mind coming, and in those early days. Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating to think about how the name change reflected, you know, that discussion that was going on in regard to whether it's part of Asian studies, whether it's actually part of sort of advanced studies, and you know, in terms of its contribution to Asian studies and relative to other centers in Asia, especially in Southeast Asia. Did you see that or envision the type of influence we would have, both, you know, on other institutions within the region as well as globally? Was this the idea to actually make us, as you said, a hub?
It's lovely to hear you say that as if it was a fact. Certainly we dreamed dreams, yes. We thought, I mean, Singapore's position is extraordinary as a sort of first world place in a poor neighborhood, but a fascinating neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I mean, I love Tommy Coe. I mean, he's been a great shield and protector for Aadi, but he always used to say, nobody takes anybody in Singapore seriously except as a part of Southeast Asia. That's what makes it so important and so exciting.
Beyond the sort of professional sort of context in which ARI came to be, during your time here, you had a chance to really establish the culture, the professional ecology, of the Institute, and whether it was creating events or bringing certain folks in. And I was wondering, amongst them, were there signature moments that you remember fondly, that you remember that were really crucial to ARI's development, its direction, its trajectory, small or big? Do you have something to share with us in that regard?
Yeah, I have three things, if I'm allowed. Again, Tommy Coe always had three things. Firstly, was in the beginning series. That I'm not sure if it's still going, but it still is. Way in which new colleagues, new hires, introduce themselves. Where have they been and where are they going? How did they get here? And that never ceased to enthrall me. Just how amazing my young colleagues were. That the diverse and extraordinary backgrounds they had, always coming from culturally complicated worlds. Because the world is complicated. I mean, growing up in Australia and New Zealand, you sort of get the sense that the world is rather homogeneous and boring, but most of the world isn't, and certainly Asia isn't. So I mean, that was always exciting to me, a real buzz every time it happened. I thought, it's such a privilege to be part of these these young, hopeful people's lives. The second thing I was going to say was that what you now call the Graduate Forum, but I've said that already. But again, the first time it happened, I thought we're not just polishing NUS's luster as a global, powerhouse university. We're actually doing something for the region, and it's something important and something not that hard to do. It doesn't take that much money to make a big difference for these kids struggling to write a dissertation, or to be a scholar, or understand what being a scholar would mean if you had a decent library and decent resources and decent mentors. So I mean, that's just such a good idea. And I was very excited when it first happened, and just meeting all those folks who first rolled up. The third one is more specific, and I suppose I remember it partly because there were lots of photos of it, which you guys use sometimes. The 5th anniversary, which was a big deal in a couple of ways. I mean, I think wisely invited the then Minister of Education, Tharman Shanmugaratnam, who subsequently became Deputy Prime Minister and so forth. He was already a smart guy in the cabinet, but he was responsible for us. He was minister. And so he said all the right, wonderful things, almost too good to believe, about Aadi and about the study of Asia, and especially about the social sciences, how important that is, that we shouldn't put all our money into hardcore engineering and medicine and stuff. This is important. This is the thing we need. And I didn't write all of it myself. Some of it. He said a bit extra. So I was very pleased about that. But the other thing that was pleasing, we had a dinner afterwards, and at the table where Tharman and I were, Jomo was also there. K.S. Jomo from Kuala Lumpur, as he then was. And he'd been banned in Singapore up to the time we invited him to come down as a visiting fellow. And I mean, that in itself was something of an achievement. Again, thanks to the Tommy Coes and so forth of the world, but partly thanks to just doing it, as opposed to what I found around in the corridors a bit was, well, no, you can't do that because they won't like it. Whereas, why not try it? When we got him and Tharman together, it turned out they were graduate students, not at the same time, but in different places. Tharman was at LSE, and Jomo was in Harvard. But they they were the same generation,
Yeah.
and they critiqued each other's. They were both trying to write theses with a sort of Marxist bent, explaining which of Marxist theories made sense about the condition of Southeast Asia and so forth. So they were old, mates from these lefty student days, and it was just great to see them, and go on about this and reveal these secrets of their radical youth.
What does RE do, or I guess in your case, what did it do when you were here, and what made it special for you as you were a part of it?
We tried to insist that we were part of the university, and we were celebrating, championing the university's ability to foster a critical, open culture. Beyond that, of course, our role was to be good, to have very high standards, and that again was something. It didn't mean trying to provoke government in any way, but just trying to appoint the best people to do the job. The people, often people with new ideas, exciting ideas. And I think probably the number of postdocs, the amount of the resources we devoted to postdocs was a really good idea at that early stage. It was a buyer's market. I mean, there was the time when, and it's, alas, hasn't got much better since, the time when it's very hard for people to get their first job. If the world is your marketplace, there's just so many people who have brilliant theses and need a first job, a first start. And that is a wonderful thing as an injection of life and energy and excitement to a university, to have bright young people ready to go. But it did mean that we could appoint some very good people and establish a reputation for appointing good people, who then went on to be great people around the world.
If you could come back, what would you do now? Where would you take us, or what would you suggest as a director, mentor, or an advisor? I mean, where would you think that we might go within the context of Singapore, as well as Asian studies and this research in Asia?
What I think is important and easy to lose I was to be at the beginning of something exciting is the biggest privilege, because you get to appoint people, you don't have to fire people so much. I mean, it's that, but ensuring the turnover is actually very hard. For a research institute to be as lively as it should be, and as I think RE has been many times, there needs to be always new people in it and new ideas in it, and also to always aim for the very best, the smartest, the newest, and the most interesting, substantial people who've got something to add. And as you say, the world should be your oyster. I mean, a lot of the world would give an arm and a leg to come to Singapore. So, I mean, one should be advertising globally. One should be interested in people who come from everywhere when they're really smart.